Welcome, my friend, my professor, Ilan Pappé. Thank you for accepting the invitation. Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure to see you, Abdel Jalil, once more.
Thank you. Thank you. As you know, my friend, humanity is commemorating the seven anniversary of the Nakba of the Palestinian people. What is your reading of the history of the Nakba up to the current genocide in Gaza?
Yes. I think that what we are witnessing is what one can call the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And that ethnic cleansing began in 1948. And as the Palestinians say, it never ended in 1948. It continued after 1948. So we have to ask ourselves, why was there an ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in 1948? And the reason goes back to the very nature of the Zionist project in Palestine. And it's good to remember a little bit about how Zionism began in order to understand why there was ethnic cleansing in 48, what constituted the ethnic cleansing in 48, and what happened since 48 until the 7th of October 2023. Zionism was a European solution to a European problem. The European problem was anti-Semitism. And eventually, a group of Jews and non-Jews, for whatever reasons, we don't have time to go into it, decided that the best solution for the problem of the Jews in Europe is to build for them a European state in the heart of the Arab world in Palestine, at the expense of the Palestinians. This kind of idea that you take Europeans who are not welcome in Europe and you build a European state for them outside of Europe is called settler colonialism. It didn't happen only in Palestine. It happened in North America, South America, in Australia. And what happens with these people, some of them are refugees themselves, Jewish refugees, is that they encounter a place where already someone else lives. And there is another people, another nation that already undergoes its own process of self-identity, national identity, self-determination, modernization, and so on. And the ideology of Zionism as a settler colonialism was that unless it can have as much of Palestine as possible, with as few Palestinians in it as possible, you cannot build a proper European Jewish state in Palestine. And therefore, from the very beginning, you can read in the books and essays of the Zionist ideologues that the only way to create a pure Jewish state in Palestine is by removing the Palestinians from Palestine. And what was necessary was the opportunity to do it. And the opportunity came at the end of the British rule in Palestine, when Britain, after 30 years, decided to leave Palestine. 3 years after the Holocaust, it was clear that the international community, especially the Western international community, would not condemn the Zionist movement if it engaged in massive removal of the Palestinians from Palestine. And therefore, the circumstances were ripe for attempting to ethnically cleanse as many Palestinians as possible. It began in February 1948, and within 9 months, the Zionist forces expelled half of Palestine's population, destroyed half of Palestine's villages and most of the towns. The international community reaction was not to condemn the new state of Israel, and the message was very important. The message was, ethnically cleansing the Palestinians is something that the West will tolerate. This message led to the continued ethnic cleansing after 1948. Because Zionism, as a settler colonial movement, all the time wanted more space, more territory, but in the new territory didn't want the people. So by the end of 1948, the Zionist movement was able to occupy almost 80% of Palestine, expel most of the Palestinians who lived in those 80%, but didn't have 20% of Palestine, what today we call the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And most of the Zionist leaders and Israeli leaders later on believed that Israel is not sustainable unless it controls the whole of historical Palestine, from the river to the sea. An opportunity came in 1967 to occupy the whole of historical Palestine. The problem was that after Israel expelled almost 1 million Palestinians in 1948, it now in 1967 incorporated a similar number because it wanted the new territories, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. However, unlike 1948, it was unable to implement a similar ethnic cleansing in 1948. And one of the main reasons was, of course, that the Palestinian national movement regained its power, its resilience, its resistance, and it was very clear that you could not do in 1967 what you had done in 1948. And instead of massive ethnic cleansing, although quite a few Palestinians were expelled by Israel during the 67 war and after 67, instead of ethnically cleansing in the same way that was done in 48, they developed a different method: the military rule, the curfews, the closures, the enclaves, the idea that if I cannot expel you from the village, at least I can limit your freedom of movement from the village. It was very clear that not one people in the world would have agreed to live under such an oppression and would resist, and that's what the Palestinians did in 1987 and in 2000. Each such resistance gave in Israel a pretext and an excuse to ethnically cleanse more massively Palestinians and even impose more cruel and ruthless punitive actions on the population. So ethnically cleansing Palestinians has never stopped an Israeli strategy to try and create a Jewish state with as few Palestinians as possible. The problem was that demography and Palestinian resistance and resilience did not allow this project to be completed. And we are still there today. Of course, the 7th of October changed the whole game. But up to the 7th of October, what is interesting is one date, and that is November 2020, the 1st of November 2022. Because this is when you have a change of political elites in Israel. The political elite until 2022, even under Netanyahu, who was in government since 2009, still believed that a mixture of occupation, ethnic cleansing, oppression, finding collaboration from the Palestinian Authority, all that would work to make sure that the historical Palestine is still a Jewish state, even if it has a large number of Palestinians living in it. In November 2022, a different political elite came to power in Israel that believes that all these tactics of occupation, oppression, collaboration is not working. And what is the only thing that can work is to repeat the ethnic cleansing of 1948. And in many ways, people don't remember this. The Israeli right-wing governments in November 22 began to pressure the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in an inhuman, ruthless methods. And in many ways, the 7th of October, which in Europe people say it came out of the blue, was a reaction to this new political elite that very clearly declared its intention to destroy the Palestinians as a nation, as a country, as an idea. And of course, once the reaction came on the 7th of October, it was used as a pretext to move from ethnic cleansing to genocide in Gaza, and God forbid they might try it also in the West Bank.
Throughout this history, the West has so far proven to be an accomplice in what has happened to the Palestinians.
Absolutely. I think that when people ask me, what did surprise you on the 7th of October? And I say, I was not surprised by the Hamas attack. I knew that it would come, given the siege on Gaza, the oppression, everything, and the fact that so many Palestinians were political prisoners. And I was afraid that the operation would be very bloody and cruel. I was also not surprised by the Israeli reaction, because as I said, I knew from history that's what Israel will do. It will use the attack in order to move from ethnic cleansing to genocide. What I really was surprised was the European reaction. It's very clear that Europe doesn't want to deal properly with its own role in Palestine. It doesn't want to deal with its role, its historical role. Without Europe dealing properly with the problem of anti-Semitism and therefore with the problem of racism, the whole Zionist project would not have been the best solution for anti-Semitism, but rather building a less racist, more democratic world would have been a much better solution for this problem. They're not dealing with their role in creating the project. They're not dealing with the role in sustaining it. And more importantly, maybe because that's a distant past, they are not dealing with the fact that at least from 1967, let's say that 1948 was difficult to know because there's no television, no internet, the whole world is in a mess in 48. But since 1967, European politicians, journalists, and academics and intellectuals know exactly what the Palestinians are suffering from, and they do nothing against it. Not only that, they continue to support a state that they know is violating the international law that the Europeans themselves have built after the Second World War. And yet I thought that the genocide in Gaza would end this European indifference, that would lead to some European recognition in its complicity in everything that happened to the Palestinians since Europe decided that the Palestinians are to be blamed for European anti-Semitism. But I thought that a genocide that is televised, is broadcast daily to people in Europe, would change the European position, would move them to try to protect the Palestinians from genocide. And this didn't happen. This didn't happen. I'm not talking about the people. The people of Europe have shown great solidarity with the Palestinian people. We're talking about the governments, the mainstream media. And I think that one of the reasons that they are not, there are two reasons, I think, why they are not showing the kind of sympathy and compassion and support that they should do. And I think many of them know that they should do it, but they're afraid to do it for two reasons. One is they have an image, which I think is not correct, but they have an image, to my mind, which is anti-Semitic, of how powerful is the Jewish lobby in Europe. I don't think it's powerful, but they think it is powerful, which is part of anti-Semitism, to think that if I dare to go against Israel, it's the end of my political career. I don't think it's true, but they are very afraid of the lobby. Secondly, they don't want to open the history, because if you are looking at the reality, you have to go back in the past, and you have to admit and recognize your own complicity in this. And they don't want to do this, and therefore we see this unimaginable and incomprehensible European indifference. But it's not only indifference, as you know yourself, Jalil, and everyone else knows. You cannot express freely your support for Palestine in Europe. This is incredible. You can show support for the Ukrainian. You can show support for anyone else in the world if you think that these are people who are being invaded or occupied, but you're not allowed to do it for Israel. In the case of Israel, you're not allowed to show direct, legitimate, and moral support for the Palestinians. And I think one of the reasons is that if you show moral support for the Palestinians, the next question is to say, what is the role of Europe in the suffering of the Palestinians? And I don't think they want to open it. And that's why there is a denial of the Nakba. And that's why it's very important what you are doing and Sward Dignité and all the other organizations are doing. It's very important in this 77 years to understand that the Nakba is still denied. It's important to make sure that people know what happened in the Nakba, that people are not allowed to deny it, and to show the connection between what happened in 1948 and what's happening today. You cannot understand the genocide in Gaza if you don't know about the Nakba in 1948. So this is a very sacred mission, and there's no way of ending the violence without going back to 48, acknowledging the Nakba, protecting the right of the Palestinian refugees to return, and believe in the right of everyone between the river and the sea to live as a free person in a democratic state in the future.
Before my last question, I have a surprise for you. I received your friend, Dr. Farhat Afshahar, Professor Pappé, after all this black history and this threatening prison, do you think history will ever characterize the Palestinians?
History? Can you repeat?
And this threatening prison, do you think history will ever characterize the Palestinians?
Characterize the Palestinians?
Yeah.
Trying to understand the question.
Give justice to Palestinians.
Oh, justice. Yeah. Okay. I got you.
Excuse me, my English is not.
Don't worry. I understand what you are asking. I think that in the long run, yes, I do think so. I think, unfortunately, in the short term, there is no dynamics of change that can lead to a dramatic shift in the position of those who can make a change in Palestine. Political elites, financial elites, powerful people who can bring a change. But I think in the long term, the civil society would lead to a change in the positions from above, politics from above, and then justice would be served to the Palestinians. But the struggle is still on, and it will take, unfortunately, some time before we achieve that. But we are at the end of a very bad period, and we are at the cusps of a new one that I think will end up with justice for the Palestinians. Okay.
I sent parole for Dr. Afshahar if he will say something for you.
Okay.
Good day, Professor Pappé. It's a great pleasure to meet you again.
Same here.
A very important question. Every suppression begins with control of the mind, conception of terminology, of defining terminology. And we have a lot of problem with certain terminology, and I would be very grateful if you could clear it up for us. I have three conceptions that I would be very grateful to know your opinion. First, what does mean Judaism? Second, what does mean Semitism? And what does mean Sionism? Because if the conception mixed, it's very easy to ideologize and to suppress.
Yeah, and I will do that, and then we'll have to end because I have another engagement, if you will allow me after that to finish the meeting. Thank you. The pressure is very strong these days, especially around the 15th of May, of course. So you're right. It's very important to distinguish between these three concepts. So let's start with Judaism, then move to Semitism, and then Zionism. And maybe rather than looking at them each differently, let's talk about the relationship between them, which I think are very important. The idea of Zionism is a very modern idea. The idea of Judaism is an old idea, like most monotheistic religions. And we're talking here about hundreds and thousands of years when people began to be monotheistic, whether they became Jews, Muslims, or Christians. Zionism is totally modern phenomenon. And surprisingly, what many people don't know, it began as an evangelical Christian idea. Because the idea that the Jews should not be in Europe or in the West, but rather in Palestine, which the evangelical Christians regarded as the Holy Land, was connected in their mind to the end of time, the return of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead. So they wanted to see the Jews in Palestine as part of the beginning of the fulfillment of a divine scheme that would begin a better period for Christians. Of course, in the scheme, the Jews were supposed to convert to Christianity in one stage of the process. Now, because anti-Semitism became rampant in Europe, also some Jewish intellectuals and activists began to be fascinated by this idea that because Europe doesn't want us, maybe we should create a Europe outside it. And that was Zionism in many ways. They also thought that they were also, like so many other people in Europe in the mid-19th century, fascinated by the idea of nationalism. You know, all around them, people suddenly became Polish, became German, became Austrian, became Serb. We forget that nationalism is a modern phenomenon. It's not a modern phenomenon, and especially in Europe. And so they thought it would both be a solution for the persecution of the Jews, and as well as a new definition of Judaism as a modern nationalism, as a modern national movement. And that is Zionism. What they did was, and that was the problem. They believed that the only way of making this project successful is to convince people that Zionism and Judaism is the same. And as we know, when Zionism began, most of the Jews in the world did not accept it. They believed that Judaism was a religion, not a nationalism. And even Jews who were secular said, yes, there is a problem of anti-Semitism, but let's make it a more democratic world, make it a more socialist world, make it a more liberal world. That's the solution for anti-Semitism, not to become nationalists ourselves. We are the victim of European nationalism. What's the point of taking the venom that bites you and adopt it? And therefore, there was a lot of rejection. What helped the Zionists in many ways was, of course, the Holocaust. When they said, you see, that won't help you if you're a socialist or a liberal or religious or secular Jew in Germany, you are doomed to be killed by the Nazis. And that created, of course, more support to the idea of Zionism. But the attempt to say that because of that, Judaism and Zionism is the same never worked. It doesn't work in Israel today. And it's very interesting that it didn't work among the Jews who lived in the Arab world and the Middle East as a whole. You know, if you talk to Jews in Iran or Jews in Morocco or Tunisia, before their arrival of Zionism to Palestine, even at the most difficult moment, they would never thought that the solution for a difficult moment, because they are Jews, isn't building a Jewish state in Palestine. No. They thought that the solution was to make Iran a better place, Morocco a better place. But there was no need to get out. They saw themselves as part of the nations in which they lived. Zionism created this confusion among them, that you are not Moroccans, you are not Iranians, you are not Tunisians. You belong to different nations, which is exactly what anti-Semites said about the Jews. You're not French, you're not German, you're different people. And that's why Zionism itself supports anti-Jewishness. Now, let me finish with Semitism, because I think that's very interesting. Of course, this is not anti-Semitism. What we are talking about is prejudice and discrimination against the Jews because of hatred to the Jewish religion and to the way Jews behaved or lived in Europe. It should have been called anti-Jewishness, not anti-Semitism. We don't even know, if we believe Shlomo Zand and historians like him, we don't even know if the Jews in Europe in the 19th century were really Semites originally. You know, he has this theory that the Jews of Europe are not the Jews who lived during the Roman time, descendants of the Khazars of the 13th century. But let's leave that aside. It doesn't matter. Jews are European. Whatever is the ethnic origin of Europeans, it doesn't matter whether the European is a Jew or a Christian. They are Europeans, and they come from that same history, ethnic history. It's very interesting that the Israelis and the pro-Israelis adopted an anti-Jewish idea that actually, in order to prove that a German Jew is not an Echt German, is not a real German, is to say he cannot be a German because he's a Semite. There was no scholarly validation to this idea. There was no scientific validation to that idea. It was a pure racist idea to say, I'm an Aryan and he's a Semite, so he cannot belong to the German nation. And it's amazing how the world has adopted it. If anything, if anyone is a Semite, these are the Palestinians. They are Semites. And anti-Semitism should actually define hatred towards Palestinians, not towards Jews. But you know, sometimes media and academia make these inaccurate references, and it's become prevalent. But I think the most important with this, I will finish. I think the most important thing is to explain to people that Zionism is ideology.
I'm very concerned about Judaism because I have the impression the cultural identity of the people in Jerusalem, in Israel, has been occupied and colonized by the conception of Zionism. And I'm fearing the consequences for the Judaism, because Judaism is a religion. And as I understood you, the Zionism is an ideology.
That's right.
And when an ideology occupies a religion, it transforms it to a very aggressive behavior. We can see it in Islam, we have seen it in Christianity. You have just to think about the middle century of the ages, what the Christianity did in the name of the religion, or what Islamic State does with Islam. Do we have similar appearance now?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Zionism took over, usurped Judaism. And in the minds of many people, unfortunately also in the Arab world, Judaism and Zionism is the same. When Palestinians say al-Yahud, they mean the Zionists, but it can sound as if they mean the Jews wherever they are. That's a very negative development. But there is a positive one. Among young Jews, especially after the 7th of October, there is a new idea that you can be a Jew, even as a secular Jew, without being identified with Zionism. And we can see this movement, especially among the young Jews in America. They define their Judaism as an ethno-cultural identity or a religious identity, but this has nothing to do with Zionism. In fact, many of them are very active in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. So I think that on one hand, we have this very dangerous process by which people would equate Zionism with Judaism, and that leads to more anti-Jewish hatred and racism. But on the other hand, there is a younger generation that develops new notions of Judaism, much more universal, that will provide protection for the Palestinians rather than the fuel for their destruction.
Thank you.
Really sorry that I have to leave you, but I do have another webinar that I have to join. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to see you both very, very soon.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Ilan Pappé. Thank you very much, Professor Farhata Afshar. See you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.